A very warm welcome to the Booms and Bust Show. My name is Jonathan Davis. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. I shouldn't actually be so joyous because I'm reading in the births and deaths column in the Times classified ads, and I think I should read this out to you. It is with sad regret that democracy died quietly in her sleep at 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019. She was 312. The cause of death was by foul play, and the culprits have yet to be brought to justice. Democracy campaigned for the rule of law, human rights, and free elections. She listened to everyone and favoured the majority in all her decisions. She will be sorely missed. God have mercy on her soul. Indeed. And today is Monday, the 15th of April, 2019. 1 week ago, on the 8th of April, we saw the 6th anniversary of Margaret Thatcher's death. Her old home had loads of flowers out front. Almost appropriate, isn't it? So, Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk Radio the Friday before last asked the question about what's happening with UK productivity.
Let's put these questions to Jonathan Davis. He's an economist, wealth advisor and podcaster on all these issues. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning, Julia.
So why is our productivity going down?
Well, it goes back to 10 years ago, I would say, because I'm looking at the Office for National Statistics longer-term data for productivity, and it is astonishing that in 2008 a rising trend suddenly stopped, and it's largely been flat for the last 10 years. What happened 10 years ago? Not that simply that we had a huge recession, but that we bailed everyone out. So what we did was we bailed out failing businesses and supported them, which meant that competitor businesses which were rising were weeded out.
Well, hold on a minute. That would make sense in the banking financial sector where they were bailed out, but everyone else wasn't bailed out. A lot of companies went under as a result of what happened.
Yeah, well, a lot of companies, it's all relative. But when you consider that the whole of London, in effect, was bailed out, everyone's house price, in effect, was bailed out. So there was a lot of bailouts. It was all pervasive, in fact, across the economy. Clearly, if you're going to have a recession, some businesses are going to go bust.
But hold on a minute. We saw bailouts in other countries. Now, of course, we had a massive big problem because we were so reliant on our financial sector. It's a huge percentage of our economy. Yep. But America, again, they had big bailouts. Their productivity is on the way up. And we're told,
exactly.
I mean, I can completely absolutely accept that the Germans are more productive than us. What I can't accept, and with no disrespect to the French people, loving the French, love going on holiday there, but I've spent enough time there. My family live there part of the year. They're not more productive than us. They take a 2 or 3 hour lunch break.
Well, they always have, absolutely. Yes, indeed, some countries are doing better than us, and that's exactly the point. We are an over-financialised economy. Thus, when you bail out essentially the financial aspects of the economy, it means that the other aspects of the economy don't get as good a look in. And yet it ought to. Manufacturing in the UK is absolutely fantastic. The quality of engineers, we build the best satellites in the world. The Formula One racing cars, we're the second largest car manufacturer, pharmaceuticals, etc. However, because we're not investing enough in areas which require investment. Instead, we're putting all our money into property. That's an exaggeration, but I'm sure you get the point I'm making. We're too much a financialized economy. We're not putting money into actually wealth-creating areas.
And is part of the issue that we are so reliant on those services, and that's what it is, and also because so much of our success is actually based on people. It's actually people doing jobs. It's all very well, you can mechanise and increase productivity in manufacturing and in other production in a way that you simply can't do that with where all the factors that drive our economy in the service sector. It's people, and fundamentally you can only make people so efficient.
Well, no, you can make people a great deal more efficient in a service economy. And I can tell you that here we are, 2019, within 11 years, 2030, listen to this, there will practically not be a taxi driver. There will practically not be a bus driver. You'll find that fast food joints are highly mechanized, highly automated. You'll find that call centers are highly automated. So you'll find that millions of jobs currently will simply not be there within about 10 years from now.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. And just finally, I must ask you, we've had so many warnings about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit. We've the Bank of England governor put his tuppence worth in. It always comes in totally independent, but just happens to come at crucial moments when there are votes in the Commons and the like. We've had numerous people just saying this would be an absolute disaster. Dominic Greaves, the former Attorney General, talking on the show this morning. You're involved in this world, in the financial world. You're an economist. Would a no-deal Brexit be an economic disaster for this country?
Julia, Brexit has effectively, essentially no effect on the economy. The global economy is what affects the open economy of the United Kingdom. Brexit on the economy, on the pound, on the stock market, on jobs, it's an absolute fallacy.
You said there's nothing to be afraid of. Why are so many people telling us there is something to be afraid of then?
Because, as you say, as you have people on your show every day for the past 2.5 years, the establishment is hugely remain. The media, the politicians, the international businesses, the big banks, as I call them, the party of Davos, clearly is succeeding, unfortunately, in keeping us in the EU. I keep hearing prominent leavers say we will leave. Unfortunately, so far they're wrong. I hope they're proven right, but so far they've been proven wrong.
This is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because we're constantly told that, the people in the city, people in business, that they are opposed to this. We need to care about business. I meet people in the city all the time who tell me that actually you just can't be open and honest about the fact that you're Brexit. Something like 40% of people working in the city, certainly entrepreneurs, huge swathes of people running small and medium-sized businesses around the country, very much in favour of Brexit, think it's a great opportunity. And yet we don't seem to hear those voices. We're constantly hearing from the CBI, International Institute of Directors, telling us how dreadful Brexit would be.
Yeah, well, that's because they represent the big international businesses, and the EU represents big international businesses. 90%, listen to this, 90% of British businesses have got absolutely nothing to do with Europe or the EU. 90%. And yet, 100% of us are all affected by EU's regulations. And what are the regulations there for? As I said in the speech, on the 29th, the day we were meant to be leaving, big business lobbies, goodness knows how many there are in Brussels, on vast salaries, lobbying the EU for more and more regulations. Why? Because big business loves more regulations, because it stops small businesses or medium-sized businesses from competing.
Jonathan Davies, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, economist, wealth advisor and podcast. It's 9.
So I thought I'd play that. I did, of course, a link to it on Twitter at Booms Busts Show, but and of course it's on the Jonathan Davies YouTube channel. But I'm just not sure if many of the things that I'm tweeting now are getting actually through to anyone's timeline. I did a thing for the BBC television in Northern Ireland, which I tweeted a few days ago, and one person retweeted it. There were 0 comments, 0 likes, and I started asking, are people seeing this? And I was actually getting the response, this was not on my timeline, which I'm not surprised at. I'm mildly shocked, but I would perhaps ask you, if you want to hear what I'm doing in the mainstream media, then set up a list on Twitter, put Boom's Bust Show into that list, and then make sure you check out what's on that list every day. And you can perhaps have half a dozen or 10 of your the tweeters that you definitely want to see every tweet from them. You should therefore get to see the tweets if they're on a special list. So it's the 15th of April. We're into the new tax year. Can I just say that I love my country? I'm ashamed of my government. In America, Dick Cheney was never indicted. President Bush was never indicted. Bolton was never indicted. Mattis was never indicted. But Julian Assange, who exposed their horrific war crimes, primed and instigated by lies, is arrested over an alleged, quote, attempted computer hack, unquote. Assange's lawyer says, quote, this precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States, unquote. Now, understandably, many of you will have been taken in by the mainstream media that he's yet to be prosecuted for rape charges, rape allegations. Well, let me tell you, if you look more deeply into the story, it was actually Home Secretary Theresa May who got the Swedes to keep the investigation going when the Swedes wanted to shut it down. Theresa May. And no doubt you'll have heard with great pomp and circumstance that Britain will clamp down most in the world, clamping down against the internet and hate speech. Clearly, they've never heard of the Middle East, the Islamist societies. Clearly, they've never heard of China and other socialist societies who have already clamped down on the internet, where, for example, you can't even get Google or Twitter. But the Tories are delighted. They're saying this is how we are acting. We are acting against the spreading of hate speech, of paedophilia, of sexual abuses. No, it's not. They're acting against free speech. They're acting against anyone who speaks against socialism. Let me remind you why we are still in the EU. Leave 17.4 million, Remain 16.1. Leave 406 constituencies, Remain 242. Leave 148 Labour constituencies, Remain 84. Leave 247 Conservative constituencies, Remain 80. Leave 9 regions, remain 3. Leave 160 MPs, remain 486. And these wonderful MPs, we have a report from the Mirror, and they're reporting that politicians have profited £42 million on second properties which we, the taxpayer, paid for. Michael Gove, £900,000. Graham Brady, £1.1 million. Who else are we interested in? No one really that we know that we're interested in, but you get the point. Also in the trough, no doubt you saw, and it lasted 5 seconds, or was it 5 nanoseconds? If it was a Tory issue, it would have been front page and on the Mar Show and on Newsnight and on Drive on Radio 4 and Today on Radio 4 for about a month. 2,500 local council executives are earning 6-figure salaries. Don't forget, by the way, some 30+% of their salary goes into the gold standard index-linked pension. 608 council executives earn more than the Prime Minister. Isn't it fair to say that the Prime Minister does a bigger job than a local council executive? Slough Borough Council topped the Taxpayers Alliance TPA Town Hall Rich list. The interim chief executive, he's on just short of £600,000 before he left his position in December 2017. Wirral and Birmingham councils came second and third in the top 20 of the highest remunerated local council managers, pen pushers, bureaucrats in 2017 to 2018. Separately, an NHS trust, I read, pays someone £100,000 a year, plus pension, to be a racial equality officer. Do not tell me that the NHS and the public sector has too little money. So now all of a sudden, with of course a Tory leadership election looming, now the Tories are saying they will table a bill to cap local authorities from paying more than £95,000 to leaving officials. Excuse me, why are they paid a lump of money when they leave their jobs? Ask any socialist, indeed Corbynista, to explain why UK food bank usage is on the increase, and they'll respond in a hand-wringing frenzy of self-virtue and hysterical ranting. People are literally starving to death. Pensioners are freezing to death, frozen solid in their armchairs. Disabled people have been murdered by the Tories. People are dying in hospital cupboards, and the Tories are running around eating children. The Trussell Trust have a moral reputation for helping those in need via their extensive network of food banks. Do you know they handed out over 1.3 million food parcels to the quote needy unquote in 2017? Tell me, with the lowest unemployment on record, why are food banks opening up at such an alarming rate? 2 answers I would give you. More and more people are realizing how easy it is to get a week's free shopping. Hey, let's go down the pub, spend all our grocery money, we'll go down the Trussell, won't we? Let's go down the Trussell. Second, the Trussell Trust, which organises, and may I suggest to you, peddles most of the food bank network, charges £1,500 if you want to set up a food bank, one-off, and then charges £30 a month service fee by every food bank. So, not only is it very easy to set up a food bank, but the Trussell Trust is actually incentivised to create as many food banks as possible, whether required or not. An investigative journalist volunteered to work in several food banks. This person witnessed people chain smoking, drinking alcohol. They had smartphones. They always left with food packages. One person was overheard discussing with a friend how they went on holiday with the money they'd saved from not buying food. Both food bank operators and the Trussell Trust have huge vested interests in ensuring these food banks operate to maximum levels, because there happens to be an ever-expanding industry built on the back of them. So I've told you about the amount of money that the Trussell receives. The food bank operators are free to register their individual food bank as a charity, and of course can run their own events, fundraiser activities, take donations from local businesses, and then decide whether or not they take a salary and how much. Supermarkets earn kudos and advertising by donating food. In 2014-15, the Trussell provided food banks with £1.68 million worth of funding through their partnership with Tesco, £920,000 of donated goods, and £140,000 of grants. That's 5 years ago. They're the latest published figures. Let's assume it's dramatically increased since then. Take into account the events, fundraiser activities, donations. It's easy to see how food banks have become such a lucrative cog in the poverty industry. How very capitalist. Because of the fees the Trussell Trust charges and the huge sums of other monies involved, it's in the Trussell's best interests to open as many food banks as it possibly can, whether needed or not. The fact that anybody can open a food bank anywhere they choose to, with Trussell's assistance, provided the food bank operatives cross Trussell's palm with the appropriate pieces of silver, supports this claim. And as with all things that are free, it's simply a case of opening the doors and waiting for the locals to turn up for their handout. Before the food bank operatives can say, free stuff, the food bank is operating to capacity, the donations come rolling in, and on to the next opening. In the meantime, food bank usage figures increase, the left get to weaponise them, beat the government with a stick, and all the time the cash is rolling in. Make no mistake. Food banks are here to stay. The market says so. Moving on. I'm black and proud. Based. I'm Asian and proud. Beautiful. I'm QTBGL and proud. Brave. I'm white and proud. You bigot! What the hell is the world coming to? The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs and tyrannize their teachers. What the hell is the world coming to? So said Socrates 2,500 years ago. Listener, nothing ever changes. Except the political polls, I'm pleased to say. The Tories have dropped below 30% for the first time in 4 years. And of course, it is, as Ian Duncan Smith said on Sky yesterday, the 14th of April, it's because we haven't left. Because as soon as the 29th of March, 11 p.m. came, and we are still there, the polls for the Tories plummeted. The ERGers say again and again and again and again, she has to go. Great. So why did 200 Tory MPs vote for her again and again? It's all very well the ERGs playing Jesus in the moral high ground, but they've been failing in their objective for 3 years. By the way, listener, I'm about to turn down the mic, so you might want to alter your volume. The ERGers must stop playing defensive. When will they strike and bring down the government? Well, listening to Rees-Mogg on LBC, the Tory one, that is, the answer will be never. Party before country. So what's new? They're politicians. And remember what the amazing, the wonderful, the saint, Professor Dr. Thomas Sowell has said about politicians' motivations. The first motivation is to get elected. The second motivation is to get re-elected. And whatever the third motivation is, it's a million miles behind the first two. I think I'm right in saying that the English Democrats and Bill Cash MP says the extension is illegal. And I think I'm right in saying that it's going through the courts right now. On verra. Let me remind you a little tidbit of what this is all about. Cadbury move a factory to Poland with an EU grant. Ford Transit moved to Turkey in 2013 with an EU grant. Jaguar Land Rover recently agreed to build a new plant in Slovakia with an EU grant. Peugeot closed its Ryton plant and moved production to Slovakia with an EU grant. And no, actually, it's not even about the economy. It's about democracy. Never forget that when you're thinking about this, when you're arguing with someone. It always is about democracy. In the polls, we also see the Brexit Party at 15% we saw, and UKIP at 14%. I'm told that Gerard Batten made errors yesterday on the Marr Show. When I ask these people, what errors did he make? They come back saying, oh, he called a UKIP MEP candidate, Carl Benjamin, satirical, after Benjamin made a statement ages ago about a Labour MP talking nonsense, that he wouldn't even rape her. This isn't satirical? Of course it's bloomin' satirical, and that was Batten making an error? You people who have joined the Brexit Party, I hope you know what you're doing. What's Farage now saying? What did he say? Was it in Coventry or Birmingham? I think it was in Birmingham. UKIP are a bunch of louts. The Brexit Party are good people from Middle England. This is paraphrasing Nigel Farage. So no working class voters for the Brexit party, eh, Nige? Remember how many working class voters Tommy Robinson has brought to UKIP? Remember too Paul Joseph Watson at Prison Planet, Count Dankula, Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, who's a classic liberal. These people, I estimate, bring 1 to 2 million. Sorry, I haven't even mentioned Tommy Robinson. 1 to 2 million followers to UKIP. Farage and his ego, as I have been saying for weeks, have split in half the Leave vote. It was 29%. It is now in 2%. And potentially in tatters. For shame! It is absolutely unconscionable. It is, however, what it is. The Brexit Party and UKIP will compete against each other. Farage is obtuse and quite wrong and childish. I'm taking my ball away. I don't care that neither of us will be able to play football now. He's also the Remainers' lapdog. And incidentally, UKIP will do far better than everyone has been saying the last couple of days outside of UKIP, in the locals and in the Euros. That is my analysis. Moving on. President Donald Trump does it again. He recognized Israel's right to settle in the Golan Heights and for their security. Absolutely, unbelievably sensational. And the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, leads a sort of a Tory party. He's just won the country's national election, securing a record 5th term in office. His nickname is Bibi. He ran on a strong security platform. Mazel tov. Let me remind you who voted in the Israeli general election. Conservatives, socialists, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, gays, you name it, because Israel is the sole democracy in the entire Middle East, from India, bypassing Pakistan, Turkey, Afghanistan, all the Middle East, right up to Europe. There is no other democracy for thousands of miles. And yet, they want to annihilate Israel because it stands as a beacon of freedom across the world. And correct thinking people recognize this. Incorrect thinking people want to murder every person in Israel, including the Muslims, who clearly understand what democracy means, and they are desperate to hold on to their democracy. That's why even the Muslims are high-ranking officers in the Israeli Defense Forces, in the police, in the judiciary, in government. Because it's not your religion, it's not your skin color that matters in Israel. It's whether or not you're a Democrat. March the 31st, 2019. Colonel Richard Kemp, who served in the British Army in Afghanistan, testified before the United Nations fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict. He denies that Israel engaged in war crimes and crimes against humanity. Colonel Kemp, over to you.
The Israeli security forces committed serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. These violations clearly warrant criminal investigation and prosecution.
We have provided documentation to the High Commissioner's Office. We would urge members of the Council and the international community to ensure that those are brought to the International Criminal Court.
Murder and bloodshed is the dominant tactic of the occupying force. It is reported these abuses were war crimes, crimes against humanity.
Ongoing barbaric aggression by the Israeli occupation forces against civilian protesters.
The document has made clear that they were killed in cold blood. We hail the report from the COI and thank the COI for the efforts deployed. We firmly condemn the aggression at the hands of the Israeli forces.
The report of the Commission is testimony to Israel's unlawful behavior and disregard of human rights.
The use of power by the Israeli army against the Palestinian demonstrators in Gaza.
I give the floor to United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, I was a British commander in Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan and have extensive experience dealing with rioting crowds whipped up by armed terrorists. I have observed the violent demonstrations on the Gaza border many times from the front lines. Unlike you, Mr. Chairman, and your Commission who have never been there. These are outrageous efforts to break through the fence and slaughter Jewish civilians. Hamas also set out to induce the IDF to kill Gaza civilians, to instigate global condemnation of Israel. The IDF took every possible step to avoid Palestinian casualties, but using live ammunition as a last resort was the only way they could defend their own people. The Commission grotesquely perverts this reality. I accuse this Council of handing a deliberately biased mandate to the Commission intended to defame Israel. I accuse this Commission of misrepresenting Hamas's actions, twisting organised violence into peaceful protest. I accuse this Commission of acting as an instrument of Hamas terrorism by falsely accusing Israel of crimes against humanity, by validating terror tactics and by inciting killing and violence. I accuse this Commission of betraying the Palestinian people by failing to condemn their Hamas oppressors who, as we meet today, are firing on genuine peaceful protesters in Gaza. I accuse this Commission of wicked prejudice against the Jewish state and its army in a manner calculated to undermine its ability to defend itself. Greater violence is planned by Hamas in a few days. Violence this Council could restrain by condemning Hamas for its murderous actions and rejecting this outrageous report. I appeal to every member state to repudiate it. If you do not, you will have the blood of Palestinians and Israelis on your hands.
I know who I would trust in that council. What about you, listener? If you want to talk to me about this stuff, please do so. Email me at jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com, Twitter @boomsbustshow, and I send out the Booms and Busts report, which is more about markets, investing and economics, every couple of months. If you want to receive it, it's free. You'll never be junk mailed. Get me your full name and email address. Today, the 15th of April in the UK, we hear from the Tory government that they are going to be ending what they call Section 21 legislation. And the tenants groups are cheering like Billy-O how wonderful this is. If you're not a tenant or a landlord, you probably don't know what Section 21 is. It is quite simply this: after a fixed term lease, a landlord can hand you a 2 months notice under Section 21, and you have to leave after 2 months because the landlord requires you to leave. It's as simple as that. So if you've got, say, a 12-month lease, they can give you a 21 order after 10 months, and you have to leave on the dot after 12 months. Otherwise, you're outstaying your welcome, and then they can go through eviction proceedings. Although the reality is eviction normally takes somewhere between 3 and 5 months from when they start it, and they can't start it until the day after you were meant to leave. This is yet another onslaught against landlords, private landlords, who have had a license to print money for 25 years until the last few years. What's changed? Well, one, house prices are no longer rising. They're indeed falling in London. And two, particularly if you've got another income, you're already a higher rate taxpayer as a landlord, your taxes from rental income are absolutely soaring until it is probably already uneconomic pardon me, to be a landlord. But certainly by next tax year, it's either 2021 or 21-22, I'm not quite sure, it will be uneconomic to be a landlord. It's as simple as that. If you have, this is the point, if you have a buy-to-let mortgage on your property, and it's quite a sizable mortgage. So clearly the government has something against private landlords. Although they pushed landlords for 2 or 3 decades, they're against them now. They want rid of them. And there's no question there will be landlords now looking to sell their properties. I tell you, if you've got no more impetus of new landlords coming in and buying in the market, if they have stopped buying and they're actually selling, this is yet another negative to house prices. Yet another. I've been over all the negatives many, many times. So one, house prices will fall. 2, there will be fewer buy-to-let properties available. And 3, therefore, this actually ultimately is going to hurt tenants. Because if house prices are falling anyway, and I've gone through the reasons why, well, if there's fewer properties, rents are not going to fall as quickly as house prices. This is going to hurt tenants. So, you know, those tenants who are laughing and cheering right now, they're naive idiots. They're walking into a hole. It's as simple as that. The answer to these questions is never more socialism. Never caps, never restrictions, never more socialism. The answer is always more capitalism. Don't bail out the banks when they go belly up because they've recklessly loaned, and therefore don't bail out borrowers, and end the dreadful Help to Buy scheme, which all it has done for years is raise house prices. So take away socialism, bring in capitalism. That's the way you help tenants and you sort out the housing market. So, David Lammy, can I just ask, when you say Nazis, do you mean National Socialists, or is it just anyone with whom you disagree? Can I remind you, listener, that the easiest way to get the Booms and Busts podcast is to go on to audioboom.com, click listen, search Booms, and there it will be. Click subscribe, and it will be sent to you every time I publish a new podcast. I'm looking at a chart of factory stocks, in other words, inventories, across the G7, UK, US, France, Japan, Canada, Italy, and Germany. And it's, stock levels are broadly flat, slightly rising over the last 25 years across the G7. There was a big sharp fall, as you can imagine, in 2008, but it's broadly flat since 1992. Except in the UK, in the last few months, we have an insane pace of stockpiling in UK factories ahead of when we ought to have Brexited. Nothing like it has been seen in some 30 years across the G7. So this, of course, has kept UK manufacturing, indeed the UK economy, that bit stronger the last few months. There will, of course, be an unpleasant unwinding in due course. It stands to reason. So bear that in mind when you see GDP stats recently and in the next few months. In the United States, weekly jobless claims numbers, we have yet another low for the economic cycle at under 200,000. In fact, it's not just the low in the cycle, it's the lowest number of jobless claims in the US since the 1960s. And bearing in mind, the population of America has gone up 60% since the 1960s. And if you look at a chart of jobless claims, as you can imagine, it rises dramatically, heading into a recession, and it falls and falls and falls as you get the economic cycle of general economic expansion. So everyone who's a bear is saying, well, if it's this low just now, it's about to turn up and we're heading to recession, because that's what's happened every time we've had an economic cycle in the last 5 decades. I will remind you, listener, that in January 89, 30 years ago, when we got a jobless claims number low in the cycle, it was still 18 months before we got a recession. In April 2000, it was 11 months. In January 06, it was 23 months before we actually had a recession. German manufacturing orders, year on year, they're down a whopping 8.4%. It's not to do with the EU, folks. On the Booms and Bust show, as anti-EU as I am, I will not tell you stuff which they tell you in the media, or the politicians tell you, whether I'm generally in agreement with those politicians or not. No, it's because of China. China buys enormous amounts of stuff from Germany, will clearly materially less in the last year. So, it's not the EU. A bright spot in the EU, strangely you might think, is Italy. Why? Because Salvini's crowd, they have just announced that they are going to do about €1 billion of privatizations. Isn't that what Maggie did in the 1980s, which was copied all around the world? And didn't it help to make Britain amazing for a decade? They're doing it in Italy, of all places. And if that isn't fantastic, I don't know what is. China, they have African swine fever. Pork prices are absolutely soaring. and pork prices are a key element to China's inflation basket. Pork prices rose over 5% last month. So, I would suggest to you that, yet again, there's another strong indication of global inflation. Let me tell you as well that core US producers' inflation in March was the 20th month in a row that was above 2%. Don't tell me we don't have global inflation, because we do. I'm looking at a chart stretching back to the year 2000, and it shows whether or not emerging markets or developed markets central banks' last interest rate move was up or down. It tells us that, just getting the colours right, nearly 60% of emerging market central banks' last interest rate move was up, and indeed over 50% of developed market central banks' last interest rate move was up. Why are governments around the world raising interest rates? Oh, it must be because we've got deflation. No, it isn't. If you want to know what's happening in inflation, listener, look at the TLT. It's the exchange traded fund for long dated US Treasuries. And the TLT price is the same as it was back in the summer of 2017. It's been higher, which means deflation. It's been lower, which means inflation, and it's back up to where it was just about 2 years ago. So we've had no change apparently in US inflation in the last couple of years, or the outlook for inflation. Let's see how that develops. Big story in the markets. Massive mega oil company Chevron is buying Anadarko for $33 billion. A mega deal, of course. So, as far as I can tell, first of all, it's great for Anadarko shareholders, because the share price massively jumped like 30% overnight. And it's great for Chevron as well, because energy companies are priced incredibly cheaply in relation to history, and certainly in relation to the stock market generally. If you accept that we are in generally an inflationary world, you might want to seriously consider investing in your long-term investments, your pensions, your ISAs, in global energy shares. In relation to the stock market in America, insiders, which is like directors and senior executives, they are selling shares at the rate of less than 5-to-1 buy. Above 12 sales to buys, it's bearish. Below, it's bullish, and it's less than 5-to-1. This is super bullish. The global Dow index is breaking up above a falling resistance level. It's a breakout. Global shares are in a multi-year bull. The S&P advanced decline percentage continues to rise up and up. This again is bullish. 73% of S&P constituents are above their 200-day moving average. Super bullish. Remember, at the end of December, around Christmas, only 10% were above their 200, and it was super, super bearish, so they told us. It wasn't. I just kept laughing, and we did not sell a penny in shares. 4 months ago, we were hearing the semiconductor cycle was rolling over. We're heading towards recession. The SOXX, the SOX semiconductor ETF, 2 weeks ago, hit an all-time high. The FTSE, I told you recently, above 7,200, and it's probably in a multi-year bull market, above 7,400, and it's all but confirmed. Where is the FTSE right now? Let me just get the right chart. Give me 2 seconds. The FTSE stands right now at 74.32. If it closes this week, which it very probably will because Easter week, not much is going to happen. If it closes next week above 7,400, I'm telling you, we are very likely in a multi-year bull market. The DAX in Germany is looking hot to trot as far as I'm concerned. The DAX, the FTSE, the Hong Kong, the Kospi in South Korea, these, whatever they're doing, they basically tell you what global stocks are doing. And if the DAX is doing, remember when they told us Deutsche Bank was going to go out of business? I said live on air to George Galloway, the German government will never allow Deutsche to go under. Deutsche is still there, and indeed their share price, and indeed the DAX is doing very well. Long-term chart stretching way back to the 1920s. The Dow against gold is very, very high. When it gets this high, it generally reverses. Expect gold to soar against stocks over the next years. Emerging markets, there's a huge double bottom against developed markets in 2016 and the end of 2018. It's just like 1998 and 2002. I'll leave nuclear for another time. US natural gas. Total US gas exports grew 14% in 2018. Liquefied natural gas, 53%. Wow. It's not in the price of gas yet. I dare say it soon will. Exports by pipeline from 2006 to 2018, they're up from 1.5 billion cubic feet to 8 cubic feet. Exports of liquefied natural gas, they were basically zero in 2016. They're now 4 billion cubic feet. At some point, this will be reflected in the price. Blessed are the politicians, for they shall promise the earth. From Alvin Toffler, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And don't forget what Ludwig von Mises, the father of Austrian economics, said: every socialist is a disguised dictator. On that note, listener, I've had an absolute blast. I'll see you next time, and please tell your friends.